Thousand Autumns, is a Meng Xi Shi novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 121. Shen Qiao did not move for a long time. In these moments, the glint and noise around him faded. He held the slowly cooling body of Yui, his head bowed. No one knew what he was thinking. Maybe it was a scene from all those years ago, he and his martial siblings on the mountain eating and sleeping in sync, training together. And yet past dreams sought, people departed, what has passed will never return. Just like some errors have no way of being remedied, some cracks will forever persist, and death, impossible to wake from. The scene made Yunchang grieve, tears falling, but he was a bystander after all, remembering the situation at hand, hurriedly called out, "Shen Qishu, Shen Qishu." He saw that Shen Qiao had not moved at all, and thought it was because the other's mind had been overtaken by grief, couldn't help but start to worry. Looking around, the situation was not much improved for Xuandu's Han. Although there was one fewer Sangjing scene, but most of Hehuan sect was still present. Xiao Se had been injured by Bian Yanmei, but the injuries were not severe. Now Bian Yanmei had gone with Lu Yu in pursuit of Tan Yuan Chun. Among Xuandu's Han's 7 elders, there were 5 remaining who had to control Duan Vinyang, and deal with Tuju warriors brought by Duan Vinyang, and Xiao Se and the rest. It required much effort. Although Kong Zhen was an elder, his Wuzhong was still a notch below Duan Vinyang. At this moment he was being forced back, one maneuver he could not resolve, and his sword almost left his hand, his footwork out of sync, his body staggered, falling backwards, minding his back. He left his front open. Duan Vinyang charged his whip with Genki. Immediately it extended like a sword, aimed at his chest, menacingly, killing intent boiling over. If this strike were to hit, Kong Zhen's chest would bloom a large hole. Yunchang, seeing this, was frantic, rushed forward with his sword to help, but his speed could not keep up with his eyes. He'd never get there in time. He was too slow by more than 3 or 4 breaths. Duan Vinyang's whip had already made contact with Kong Zhen's robes. Momentarily they would break through into flesh. Yunchang couldn't help crying out "Ah!" expecting to witness his Shifu's death. At this moment, a blur flashed before his eyes. Yunchang thought it was a trick of the light. He blinked and saw that Duan Vinyang's whip had already been pulled back, and that beside Kong Zhen stood another person. Shen Qishu. Yunchang couldn't hold back, his tone carried relief and delight without his realization. "Bring your Yu Shishu to the side, weapons have no eyes, don't let anyone damage the body," Shen Qiao said without looking back, extending a hand to help Kong Zhen. Then he lunged at Duan Vinyang. Duan Vinyang had expected that after fighting Sangjing Xing, Shen Qiao's energy would be diminished, his accuracy gone. Who knew the other's Zhengli appeared seemingly endless, pouring forth, charging his sword or a brandishing sword light, the technique seamless, impenetrable. Despite how strong Duan Vinyang's whip was, now there emerged this feeling of impossibility of him counteracting in any way. Shen Daozang can speak freely, no need to resort to force. "I am not Sanjing Xing, we do not have a deeply rooted vengeance against each other. Today my visit was merely encouraged by Tan Yuan Chun. Yui's death was also by Tan Yuan Chun's hand. Debts must be collected accordingly. Shen Daozang must judge fairly." Duan Vinyang was not like his Shifu, although he was remarkably talented, becoming Hulagu's most prized disciple, but he was of mixed blood. He was destined to never receive the level of respect and accolades that his Shifu had among the Tuju. So his manner and actions were also unlike that of Yulegua. He would put more weight into practical advantages that could be gained or lost. Although it was said that master-disciple were like father-son, but a tiger father could birth a dog son, the Shifu could be strong, but that didn't guarantee a strong disciple. For example, Chi Fengge was revered his entire life, but each of his disciples had their own personality, ultimately walking their own paths. He had no way of forcing each of them to follow his way of thinking. That being said, if Yulegua was the one here, he might have challenged Shen Qiao to a duel, to force an outcome. Duan Vinyang was not like that. He saw already that today's purpose would not be fulfilled, and had already started to plan his retreat. Shen Qiao, blandly, Tan Yuan Chun isn't here, you can say whatever you want. After I've captured you, you can be cross-examined along with Tan Yuan Chun, then we'll know the truth. Although he said this, his sword stance slowed a bit. Duan Vinyang saw that there was a hope to turn things around, was secretly relieved. He added, me and Shendeazang have crossed paths several times, although never a proper exchange, but I know you're very fair when it comes to what is owed and what is paid, and are kinder than anyone. All things considered, the people that caused your fall from the cliff that day, my Shidi Kunyi has already died by your hand, Uai is also deceased. This chapter should come to its conclusion. Shen Qiao, you mean to say, that picking today to come here wasn't an opportunistic ploy at getting Suandu's hand? Duan Vinyang's expression didn't falter, he smiled. One acts according to one's position, that's a saying from Yuhan people. You and I hold different stakes, our actions would not be in line. I'm considering the advantages for the Tuju, that's nothing for you to critique, you can't blame me for this. If there wasn't Tan Yuanchun's secret message telling us of today's Zhangjiao selection, we wouldn't have known about it, so in the end, internal unity precedes resisting external forces. Shen Daozang. With everything that he said, even Shen Qiao couldn't help but admire his face thickness. Uai said that he was ambushed before falling off the cliff. Did you have a part in it? Duan Vinyang gave it up generously. Yes, but that was also with Tan Yuanchun leading the way, that I would know Suandu's Han would have a small path winding its outer mountains, with no sentries. I only have to get through the arrays to arrive on the mountain. To tell you the truth, me and Tan Yuanchun had long come to an agreement about today's events. Me and Sang Zongju were to bring our people up the mountain, kill all the elders who opposed his selection as Zhangjiao, then with the appearance of Tan Yuanchun, be beat back into retreat. After he steps fully into the Zhangjiao position, he would split the melon of Suandu's Han Purple Pavilion with us. This plan was flawless. If only Shendeazang hadn't appeared as a variable, everything would have gone smoothly. Shen Qiao had known Tan Yuanchun for decades. He never realized that the warm, kind dishikshan of his heart was actually the most treacherous. With the appearance of a saint, although he was prepared, he still held onto a thread of hope. In his mind he had already started making excuses for the other, that there must have been some hardship, until the other's backstabbing fell through, killing Uai instead. Did Shen Qiao realize these past decades, the Tan Yuanchun they knew was not the true Tan Yuanchun? Duan Vinyang, as if sensing what was on his mind, unexpectedly consoled him. To know someone is to not know their heart. Shendeazang doesn't need to be too sad. Actually, on the day Uai got Xiang Jianhuan from my Shidi to poison you, Tan Yuanchun also fanned the flames. I dare not say that it was on account of him that Uai decided to act against you, but when too many provocative words are said, it will have some effect eventually. Shen Qiao, do you have any evidence of this? Duan Vinyang laughed. Naturally, no, Kunyi and Uai are dead. Should I go to the underworld to cross-examine them? I learned of this that day from what my Shidi said. Whether it's true or not, Shen Qiao can ask Tan Yuan Chun himself. Saying this, he pulled back and dropped his arms, gave a whistle. Those Tiju warriors seemed to have received his signal. They immediately started to depart in the direction they had come in. Duan Vinyang didn't bother turning his head. His voice drifted back from far away. When we were ascending the mountain, Suan Dushan had 2 disciples killed. They were both killed by Hehuan sect. I didn't kill anyone, just injured a few. Shen Daozang will know once you've examined the wounds. Please don't count them against me. Xiao Se, outraged, you shameless disciple. They had arrived together, but in the face of difficulty they left on their own, and the cruelest thing was, they had to dig them a hole as they were leaving. Sang Jingxing and Bai Rong had completely vanished. Now Duan Vinyang and his people also departed. The remaining Hehuan sect disciples, if they had any fight left in them, their minds were in disarray, which permitted the crowd from Suan Dushan an opening. They advanced and killed until the other side had nothing left, no longer the semblance of a united front. In the end, of the 13 people from Hehuan sect, only Xiao Se and 2 others were able to escape. The other 10, their lives were left behind by the hands of the enraged Suan Dushan crowd. Kongzhen wobbled over, apologizing to Shen Qiao. Kongzhen is untalented, I was unable to seize Duan Vinyang. Shen Qiao's gaze swept over the others. Many of them had an awkward expression, and were too afraid to meet his eyes. They averted their gaze, lowering their heads. Shen Qiao understood, these people had this kind of expression, not only because they were unable to take the lives of Duan Vinyang or Xiao Se, it was because when Shen Qiao suffered his fall, they did not try to help him, but chose to side with Uai. Time had passed, the dust had settled, many people now understood, Uai colluding with the Tuja to bring Suan Dushan back into the secular world, to re-establish its place as the #1 Daoist sect in the world, was the flower in the mirror, the moon in the water, the wrong origin point, the wobbling intermediary steps, step by step was destined to walk into the abyss. But who would have guessed, Yuan Yang who mistrusted Buddhism would die of illness in his prime? Who would have guessed, flourishing Qi would be conquered by Zhou, and that Yuan Yang's successor Yuan Yun, not only could not further his father's legacy, instead giving it up to another, the north entering a new dynasty, and that Shen Qiao on account of assisting this transition would be named Tongui Yuan Miao Zhengren, bringing Suan Dushan and the Daoist sects into their place within the Sui dynasty, henceforth passed down many generations, without diminishment. Sui's relative weakness at the time of transition, hostility towards Tuju, both sides with their swords drawn and arrows notched. Uai wanted to use Tuju's potential to realize Suan Dushan's wish for re-emergence, ultimately falling short, the world ever changing. Who could have predicted all this from the beginning? Because they didn't, many of them felt guilty, were afraid to face Shen Qiao. On this point, they were not bad people. Shen Qiao knew of course, that Uai was only able to successfully become Zhangjiao because of the elders' support. Even the majority of disciples would agree Uai was more suited to the role. If he wanted to account for everything, he'd have to kick all of them out of the sect, but that would affect Suan Dushan too much. If you see everything too clearly you'll have no peers. Some things require one eye closed, no need to take everything so seriously. In the world there was no such thing as a perfect person. Although Shen Qiao had experienced much hardship, towards his old sect members and those of the younger generation, he bore no great hate, he had no intention of seeking revenge or posturing. So he said to Kongzhen, that day Uai poisoned me, it could not be tolerated by sect rules, but he's dead, a person dying is like a lamp extinguished, we won't look into it anymore, I will bring his body with me to the ancestor hall to seek forgiveness. Saying this, he switched topics, but from now on, I hope all of Xuandu's Han can work as one, unity as strength. If someone else attempts to collude with outsiders, they will be punished accordingly, no one will be spared. He was no longer the Shen Qiao of the past, this was said with a chilling ruthlessness, everyone was shaken, and rushed to express their assent. So without any need for grand ceremony, things falling into place, everyone had already accepted Shen Qiao's position as Zhang Qiao. Outside Sankingdian was a field of wreckage, many people started cleaning up the aftermath. Shen Qiao had Kongzheng lead a search party down the mountain, to find those disciples that had been on guard duty, those wounded were treated, those killed their bodies were retrieved, to be buried in short order. He had been Zhang Jiao before, he was entirely in his element sorting through these matters, methodic and thorough. Just then, Bian Yanmei returned, we've captured Tan Yuan Chun, Lu Zhanglao has him in the hall you keep prisoners, they're waiting for you to decide what to do next. Shen Qiao saw that he was covered in bloody markings, fresh blood on his lips, he asked hurriedly, you're injured. Bian Yanmei waved his hands, no matter, Lu Zhanglao is more injured than me. He was too ashamed to admit being Yan Wushi's disciple that he couldn't even capture Tan Yuan Chun. Shen Qiao brought out medicines for injuries, my Niegong is of the opposite route to yours, I cannot help you circulate qi to heal your injuries. Bian Yanmei accepted this with a thanks, then smiled, no matter, the injuries are not serious, meditating for several days should bring a complete recovery, you should go take a look at Tan Yuan Chun, I suspect you have a lot to ask him. Shen Qiao definitely had a lot of questions, but as he got closer to the hall, step by step, seeing Tan Yuan Chun bound to the pillar, disheveled and wild, suddenly felt there was nothing more that needed to be asked. It was Tan Yuan Chun who appeared calm, seeing him enter and say nothing, he gave a cold laugh, seeing me like this, you must be pleased. Shen Qiao was silent for a long while, then he said to the Xuandu's Han disciples standing guard, release his bindings, then bring chairs. The disciples were a bit alarmed, Zhang Qiao. Shen Qiao, no matter, as long as I'm here it'll be fine. The disciples stepped forward, undid the ropes, then brought chairs over. Shen Qiao had them leave the hall, then seated himself across from Tan Yuan Chun. Tan Yuan Chun had originally decided to say nothing, who knew after waiting a long time, the other still hadn't said a single thing, instead he began to feel irritated, what do you want to say to me, retreat or advance it'll all end with a knife, just do it already. Shen Qiao, I don't know what to say. Tan Yuan Chun, the winners write history, there's no need for fake sympathy. Shen Qiao remained unruffled, blandly stated, De Shikshan, you and I were Shikshandi for decades, ever since I became Shizun's disciple, when he was elsewhere, you would look after me, our time spent together is longer than Yuan Ying, any of the others, I thought I knew you well, but this turned out to not be the case, but you should know me well, whether or not I'm faking sympathy, you should also know, you don't need to provoke me on purpose. The two of them looked at each other, Tan Yuan Chun saw the other's eyes. Dark and clear, as if transparent in a single glance, just like before, unchanged. The prickly exterior he had prepared shrunk sliver by sliver, there was no more resolve and stubbornness, in the end only a pile of dead water was left. Tan Yuan Chun closed his eyes, have you thought about how you're going to punish me? Kill me to get revenge for Yuan. Shen Qiao, as Duan Vinyang was leaving he said to me, you words incited Yuan, that he was ultimately able to act to poison me. Tan Yuan Chun, correct. The other's frank admission made Shen Qiao's hand on his knee tremble. Tan Yuan Chun's eyes didn't miss this detail, his mouth twisted into a sneer, Can it be that until today you still hold out hope for this Daoist? I heard you suffered a lot on the outside, what a Wujiangless, blind man would encounter, I can only imagine, but not only did you persevere through it, your Wujiang recovered, I didn't expect that. Congratulations, Qiao, Shizun used to say, the path to Wujiang cultivation means incremental gains, but one situation is the exception, breaking precedent to create something new. Given the right opportunity, one can rapidly ascend in the spiritual and martial realms. It's most uncommon. I bet you have already realized the stage that Shizun was talking about. In the afterlife, Shizun can close his eyes and smile. Shen Qiao, why? Tan Yuan Chun knew he was asking about the previous, no reason. Ever since the moment Shizun passed on the Zhangjiao position to you, I have been malcontent. The thing with UAI was just a good opportunity, I didn't have to do it myself, just push the raft with the current, so why not? You see, even UAI didn't realize I was provoking his dissatisfaction towards you intentionally. If you hadn't appeared today, I would long have righteously received the position of Zhang Qiao. In Shen Qiao's agony it was hard to hide his rage. You and I were shikshandi for so many years, you should know my personality. That year I received from Shizun the mantle of Zhang Qiao, I worried that you might be unhappy, and asked you about it. Back then you didn't show any signs of concern, even if it was later after I was Zhang Qiao. If you wanted the position, for the sake of a harmonious sect, I would have found a way to transfer it to you. Why would you still go to such lengths? Tan Yuan Chun laughed coldly, suddenly became very animated. Why? You actually ask me why? I became a disciple before you, but Shizun favored you. I was Daoist, but Shizun gave you everything. Regardless, your caliber was high, you were naturally talented. Shizun was considering the future of the sect, of course would be inclined towards you, I can understand, but why even in small personal matters, he still preferred you. In his heart, there was only Shen Qiao his favored disciple, there was no space for anyone else's shadow. If he didn't like me, he could have expelled me from the sect. Why would he use our existence to contrast your preferential treatment? Shen Qiao felt a chill descend in his heart, watched him incredulously. This is your opinion of Shizun? Tan Yuan Chun, Shizun favored you, loved you, was inclined towards you in everything, in your mind, of course he's perfect, flawless. But what about everyone else? I want to be Zhang Qiao, so you relinquish it to me. Yes, you value your siblings, you're kind and just, but what use is that? It's not what Chi Fengge handed to me personally, why would I care? Even if you gave me 100 Zhang Qiao positions, what use would they be? I want to prove that he was wrong, you were undeserving of his regard and mantle. I want to prove that Xuandu's Han entrusted into your hands was the wrong decision. I want him to open his eyes in the underworld and see clearly, he was wrong. I want him to remember, he has another disciple named Tan Yuan Chun. This predatory Daoist before his eyes, there was no remnant of the amicable, good guy facade he had put on for so many years. Shen Qiao didn't say anything for a long time, only sighed in exhaustion. Yuan Ying and Hengbo, they do not share your sentiments. Tan Yuan Chun, a cold laugh, that's because they became disciples much later, since their first days, Shizun was distant towards them, Yuan Ying's Wujiang was taught more by you on Shizun's behalf, of course they would have no expectations. You ask a person who has never eaten rice what it tastes like, how would they be able to answer? You know now, the good guy Daoist in your mind was fake from the beginning. I kept it up all these years. When Shizun was alive I was afraid of disappointing him, after his death, I was afraid of revealing myself too early. Finally I don't have to pretend anymore, I can't even tell you how refreshing it is. He threw his head back and laughed, refreshing. So refreshing. Shen Qiao watched him laugh, his pained expression fading, saying nothing. He stood. Tan Yuan Chun, what have you decided? Directly kill me, or nullify my Wuzhong, carve out my eyes, throw me out, so I too can experience the pains you suffered. Shen Qiao looked at him for a moment, suddenly drew his sword from its sheath, stepped forward, hand extended. Tan Yuan Chun could only see sword light flash before him, an excruciating pain set off all over his body. Trying to circulate his qi, he found his inner reserves completely empty, not a sliver of Nili left. He did want him to experience life more painful than death. Tan Yuan Chun couldn't help but laugh. Instead he heard Shen Qiao say, you plotted against your Shixundi, broke the sect rules, should receive death as punishment, but Shizun previously entrusted you all to me, to protect my siblings, protect your safety and happiness, moreover to treat you with respect, and not to treat you any differently because you were not Zhang Qiao. As of today, Uai is dead, Shifu in the afterlife surely would not wish for another disciple to go join him. From today on, you'll go to Kunling Peak and guard Shizun's grave site, no matter the season, you cannot leave Kunling Peak, I will consider you dead. Without turning around once, his figure gradually grew distant until it vanished, but his voice still resounded. Tan Yuan Chun knelt sat on the floor, the pain in his body had not faded, he could only stare blankly at Shen Qiao's back. After a long time, he suddenly burst into tears. His cries echoed in the hall and spread outward. Shen Qiao paused his footsteps, raised his head to look at the sky. It was a sunny day where visibility was for 10,000 li, not even half a cloud, the skies a clear blue, unaffected by people's suffering or happiness. Shen Qiao closed and opened his eyes, he lowered his gaze to Shen Hetongbei in his hands, suddenly remembering the scene in the cave where Yan Wushi had used the sword to scale fish. The sadness in his heart unknowingly abated little by little. End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.